welcome to AI Revolution Digest, where businesses get smarter. I'm Jesslyn, and I'm going to show you how AI drives real results. And because the future is awaiting, let's dive right in. There's a quiet assumption in modern medicine that science is universal, that the data from Minnesota can diagnose a patient in Manila. But what happens when the future of medicine is built on data that never saw our skin tone, our diets, or our genes? To answer this question, now let's welcome a very special guest for today, Dr. Founder. Doc, thank you for being here. Can you tell our listeners who are you and what is it that you do?
Thank you very much, Jesselyn. Yes, I'm Dr. Arvin Faundo. I'm a pathologist and I'm based in Manila. I wear several caps. So among them are my work in the hospital doing stem cell transplant. I'm also part of a company that stores stem cells for future use for the next generation. And partly I also teach in a medical school.
Thank you. So, one of the first questions would be what made you interested in medicine and what made you specialize in your field?
Okay, so basically, it's something that's been repeatedly told to you by friends and the elderlies when I was a kid that I should be a doctor. So I kind of followed their advice, and it seems like that's the way I headed. And the specialty that I chose is pathology. It's because it encompasses a lot of things, so it covers the entire person from head to foot. So we basically make the diagnosis or provide a basis for diagnosis, which doctors use for the treatment and management of patients.
So, my question is well, now with all of this AI, a lot of students like myself would use ChatGPT if the professor was going to give us homework. Knowing that you teach medicine, med schools kids, or they're still kids, because they don't know much about medicine yet. So, how do you deal with that?
All right, so there's a generational gap actually. So those of us who were trained in the traditional ways of studying using textbooks have to learn as well how to teach the newer generations who have much more access to information online and with these apps, for example, that give you ready answers. We take that into consideration when teaching the student. So we realize fully well that we cannot stop them from using that. So what we do is to guide them on how to use it. So for example, we ask a particular question and ask them to look at the answers that are generated by these apps like ChatGPT. And we ask them to critique and see if the answer would match or would give a good or a less well explanation for things that have been discussed. It's really making them very to sorry it's asking them to do critical thinking on the information that they obtain from this.
So my question now is majority of the answers ChatGPT is gonna give, it's often based on Western studies. So these studies are often in male populations, while or Caucasian bodies. So what's the implication of that if you're gonna use that data to treat Filipinos or Asian bodies? Because even though we're both humans, our genes still have an impact. So how do you teach that nuance to your students, knowing that you're using a database that's often Western based?
Exactly. So we know that the answers that are generated are based on data that's also provided. And there are certain conditions that are more common in the Western world as compared to our region. So it's really important to emphasize that to the medical students and even the medical practitioners that this information needs to be digested and not to be taken as such. So for the students, for example, we actually run exercises with them, asking the same questions, and you'd be surprised that the answers come out different. So again, that has a lot to do with their previous experience in using these apps and all of that information. So, in fact, that's how we test them if they really look into the answers that they get, because it becomes obvious that with AI, some information cannot be provided because the research, for example, was not done in our specific population or in this part of the world.
Yeah, and what you said was also very interesting is AI, when they cannot find the data for that particular thing, it hallucinates. It tries to create data that doesn't exist. So I believe if I were to study medicine, that's something you should take into nuance as well. So my question is, before ChatGPT came and all these AI tools, when you were studying medicine, And I'm pretty sure you also studied in the States, and most of the case studies are based on Western way of medicine, where you drink
Yeah.
pills. Unlike here in Asian base, we're more holistic, meaning we take more herbal. Our diet is different. So if you're Western, you drink more milk, right? Or they're more into that. So it impacts the way they not only they digest food, but the way they process everything. So my question would be, when you were studying and the data set and all the study and the case studies you were taught in med school said one thing, but the moment you met a patient, it said another. Have you had an experience like that? Can you tell us more about, if ever?
Yes, definitely. So what you read in the books and the books that we were using when we were studying were, of course, Western based.
Mm-hmm.
So the information we get, the statistics that we have are Western based. So it's really important for us to have our own data set and researches that are focused in our own population. And even with the textbooks, even with AI, some of the information may not really be applicable to our own patients. So when that happens, we really have to blend what we learn from Western data as well as with our experience dealing with our own people.
Can you give us a concrete example of when that happened and what was your call? Because I can imagine that years of studying that this is the right data, only to be confronted by something that's quite different.
Okay, so it's difficult to say what is right. So basically, you really need to have a compromise. So, for example, if the textbooks tell you that this is the recommended medicines, you realize that some of our patients are taking some sort of
Mm-hmm.
supplements, like herbal medications, like some food supplements, and all those plus their own beliefs in the health systems. So that needs to be taken into account because AI would not be able to make those differences since there's not a lot of data or research in those particular combinations. So while one drug might work for this particular patient, but because of the other things that the patient is taking, which may or may not be known to us, so there are confounding factors really. So it really needs good communication with the patient for them to divulge exactly what are their beliefs and what they are actually doing in terms of managing their own conditions.
You said that some patients they have difference in the beliefs in the medicine practice. Can you tell us more on what you mean by that?
So, for example, even if we tell them that this is the recommended course of treatment, some would not actually consent to that because of their own particular experiences with their own family members or because of what they heard from other people. So that constitutes the beliefs that they have, contrary to what is recommended by the doctors, even with the presence of the data and all the evidences. So there really needs that close communication with the patients so that they would also be able to decide for their own treatment.
What you said was very important is there's a lot of talk that hey, AI agents are here to remove all doctors. But what you said is that's not gonna happen because first you're dealing with people, so you need to understand their experiences. And second is with AI, it's a machine. So if we're going through something difficult, especially when you're looking for a doctor. So that's something very personal to you. You want to share the experience with someone human and not with a machine. And what you said was, wait, even though AI might be good at getting all this data, a doctor should know whether or not this data is significant and important according to your needs, according to your diet and your medical history. And that's not something an AI would know. And that's not something people would consent to give ChatGPT their medical history. Like I don't know if that's something people would be comfortable giving an American based company your personal data. So my question now is, how do you train young doctors in a world of AI where it seems that we're moving very fast? Like I can imagine you said during your time, you have the textbooks, you need to slow down, you need to reflect. And that's a skill set that you use now, where even though you have this data, you get to decide whether or not this data is important. You can do that because you reflect through years of experience. So now with my generation, we're felt as if we're more productive or it's better if we churn so much information faster. What is the cost of that to the medical students learning?
Well, we're actually entering that transition. So we still have the traditional doctors who were taught the traditional way using textbooks and chalkboards. Now we're all using computers and laptops and all of that. So the students right now can easily get information very, very fast, and that's an advantage. And the other thing is that researches are available as soon as they get published, unlike in our time where we had to wait for years until we're able to get the actual journal and read the contents. So that's one good advantage because everything that's current is readily available at your fingertips. But again, the other side of the coin is that we need to be very careful in getting all this information because there is a need for it to be contextualized. Number one, in the current setting, and number two, with all the dynamics of the information that's coming in, there is a very fast turnover of this information, and some may be true and some may be proven not really effective in the years to come. So there needs to be some kind of a slowdown at some point wherein one has to analyze if we need to accept or not accept the information that we're getting.
So my question is, in medicine, we're often trained to trust peer-reviewed evidence. But what happens when the source of that evidence, and now AI is trained on, most probably, it was never made for our context? Like, for example, most of the studies are male. First off, they're male, right? And second is they're Western. So let's say you're presented with a disease that your patient went to you, and you look through the information in your journals or somewhere in the internet, and you can say this disease is quite rare, but that's in the context of the white population. But it's actually more prevalent in our population. What do you do with that, knowing that we don't do that much research, or I don't know that much research in, let's say, Filipino bodies?
Yeah, so it's really important to bring all this information into the right context. And as you've mentioned, many of the studies, especially in the past, were really focused on the Western population, might be skewed towards males because some of the studies are based on volunteers, and probably that's the easiest way to get volunteers. And that would not also take into consideration the other socioeconomic factors, which we have to deal with in our region, for example. So in the past, you would have a lot of studies about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all of that, which we see also in our region. But then there could be a lot of differences, which could be genetic, which could be cultural, diet based, for example, the difference in our microbes in our environment. There's a lot of factors that come into play. So for this younger generation of doctors, including those who are in training, they need to be reminded that those information may not be applicable in our setting, and it needs some guidance as well from those who have had experience of dealing with this kind of patients all these decades before AI came into being.
Yes, what you said is important. That the nuance to that would be it's very difficult to change the system once it's already there. For example, when the aircon was created, it was tested on male participants. And that's the reason why women like myself, when we enter a room, we always felt as if it's too cold or it's too hot or something like that because our body temperatures are apparently different between male and female. So even though we knew that for decades, the aircons that we still buy are still based on male body temperature. So the point I'm trying to say is even though we know this nuance, the moment we have a system, it's very difficult to change. Most of the medicine that we practice in the Philippines are very much Western based. So how do you convince people? Let's say I can imagine if you're when you were a med school student, you're trained in years to say, hey, this is the right way to practice medicine. You just pop some pills because that's how they often do in Western medicine. And then you now face patients that says, oh, I don't believe in pills, or I believe more in herbal medicine because this is what we practice. So how do you guide medical students to that transition? Because I can imagine it can be frustrating for them as well. That I've spent more than, I don't know, 80 hours a week studying this, and for you to just not take my advice. How do you guide students in that?
So basically, we tell them that what you read in textbooks, what you get from the internet, are basically guidance. Okay, they are not commandments. So they will really have to make decisions based on all the information available. Plus, there is really the need to communicate with your patients because we do not impose on them on the treatments that they are going to receive. At the end of the day, it would have to be the patient's decision plus the doctor's guidance in order for them to really accept what's going to be done on them. At the end of the day, even if the doctor says that you need to take these pills and they refuse to do that, there's really nothing you can do. So again, communication is important, and that is something that AI would probably have a need to learn for a long, long time in order to understand why a particular person would, for example, not accept those options that are provided to them. And if I may add, you cannot underestimate the patients these days because they also utilize
Mhm.
AI and ChatGPT to search for their own for their questions, answers to their questions. And you'd also have to deal with that because they come to you and present to you what they have researched before even seeing a doctor.
I believe this is also the case when Google went out, where I remember when I was young, I would go to PubMed. It's a website where you put your symptoms and then they'll give you something crazy that you had brain cancer or something, even though you just had a flu.
Exactly, exactly. That's what we have to deal with.
Yeah, so I can imagine now with AI, it's actually harder to tell patients. This is not the case because AI seems very personalized. And another point that you said was important was communication. Because
Yes,
when we look at AI, my father made a comment that it's very easy for him to see if a student has written this with AI because it's too white. It's very Western speaking. I don't know if you also get the same feeling, but the way we use English, the way we think about the language is different compared to the Westerners. So when we read an answer, I can imagine as a doctor and as a teacher, you would have a gut feeling that, hey, maybe this student used AI because of the way they
yeah,
structured their words. But the thing is, AI cannot replace doctors, especially in patient or context, is because the way we communicate is different. Like I can
yes.
imagine a Western doctors, the relationship doctors have with patients in the West might be different in Asia.
Yes, but I think there's agreement at this point in the medical community that what is generated by these apps, for example, would only serve as a guidance.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at them as a very efficient assistant for the work that we do. And as mentioned, even for the students, we also are able to figure out that they were not doing their actual work, but they relegate it to these apps when they answer questions. For example, we ask them in the context of a rural setting in the country, and that is something that AI would not be able to figure out. So that's how you will be able to see that the answers were actually generated by some app.
Yeah. So let's say that the government went to you and say, Doc Faundo, you're one of the best. So we would suggest that we want to create our own AI agent that's only for Southeast Asian hematology, let's say, for an example. What would you include that Western systems never consider?
Okay, so because there are a lot of differences in the regions of the world, and there is this field that's called pharmacogenomics, for example, wherein based on your genetic or genomic makeup, you respond differently to drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So what has been studied elsewhere in terms of the drug that's that's come out in the market may not always apply to a different set of population in other parts of the world. So that is something that needs more research so that we will understand why particular drugs work for these patients and does not for other types of patients. And that is mainly because of biological factors that's in their genetic makeup. And add to that, which is actually quite difficult, is also the diet as well as the customs that are particular for certain regions of the world. Because as we know, whatever we eat can interact with what drugs we are taking. And the other thing is I've mentioned our exposure to certain pollutants and chemicals and microbes, which are different in different parts of the world. So I think that's where AI would be able to help because that's quite difficult for one person to put together and try to analyze.
You're actually correct because I remember when I was younger, my dad would often say that the kids in the province are stronger compared to kids like myself that grew up in the city. And he said that's because in the city you were often too clean. But then when you were raised in a province, you can run around in dirt and somehow that makes you stronger. And I believe in that, I would say. Like when you're more exposed to this pollutants or microbes, you're actually become stronger. So I asked my dad, "Why did you raise me in the city then? You were a pre-med. You know, you knew this. Why did you raise me in the city?" But you're right.
Yeah.
My question now would be, what happens or what does it mean to preserve human dignity in an era when medicine is becoming more mechanical and sometimes emotionally distant? As more of our med school students and soon to be doctors are becoming more and more reliant or overconfident with these AI agents.
So that's a big question and a difficult one, but I think it all boils down to human interaction.
Mhm.
So I think we need to stop believing that in the future it's going to be a robot who will do everything for a person. I think we will never go out of style in this profession because even with all the available technology that we have, we do robotic surgery now, but behind that is still a human
Mhm.
because there are instances where human decisions need to come into the picture. And while we have all these assistive devices available to us, the human part, I think, can never be replaced, especially in the Asian culture, for example, where we are really family based.
Mhm.
Aside from the patient's decision, the family's wishes and decisions also come into play. And that is very important, very difficult for AI to be able to sort out. And when you are sick, I think nothing can replace the presence of a human being holding you and touching you and comforting you. And I think that's something that the machine will never be able to do.
Yes, and I would say I agree with that. And it's also in our culture to be more family centric. I can imagine in the West, once you're quite old, they just put you in a home for the agents. So they don't die someone holding their hand, which is kind of sad. And this is
Yeah.
like one of the differences in medical practices or systems in the world. So my question now is, you work in the field that demands more or less precision. In your quietest moments, do you feel the emotional cost of expected to be almost right most of the time?
Well, the precision that you're saying is actually quite important. It's because in this day and age, we go to the molecular level in terms of deciding which is the best way to address the patient's condition, and that is something we did not have in the past. But now, again, there are also other things to consider. For example, the patient's wishes, and even if we have this available medications and all of that, they also come with certain effects
Mhm.
which may be known or unknown, and which the patient may not which may not be acceptable to the patients. And so there is still that need to closely communicate with the patients all of these concerns and all these possibilities which uh, may not have been intended or even expected.
So my question now is, with our discussions, we had a lot of stakeholders involved. So the patient, they have their own wishes, they have their own beliefs. Their family also influence their decisions, at least in the Asian context. You have your own clinical judgment of what is right and what's to do. I can also imagine that our institutions or hospitals themselves would have their own policy. So with all of these different needs and interests, what does alignment mean then for medicine?
Okay, so alignment is not intended to be perfect alignment, I guess. We work in a system, so there's the patient, there's the doctor, there's the hospital, there's the government, and there's the planet, if I may. So there's a lot of things that need to be considered, and one cannot say that they are above the others. So, for example, if the doctor thinks that this is the right path to take, and the patients might have a slightly off-center view, and then there is that rigid hospital policies that you need to adhere to, as well as governmental regulations, and in a bigger context, a lot of other things like environment concerns, etc. So we cannot expect a perfect alignment of all these things. But I think at the end of the day, it will have to be a compromise among all those different options, and coming up with not the perfect solution, but something that will address everyone's concern, especially the differences.
I can imagine it can be quite difficult as a doctor, knowing that, hey, perhaps this treatment is the best, but let's say the patient cannot afford it, or the insurance companies are not willing to insure that type of treatment. I'm pretty sure that may be a struggle, I can imagine. So my question now would be, as someone who works with life at its most fragile state, how do you carry the weight of decisions that data can't fully justify, but patients still entrusted to you?
Again, very philosophical, but yes, yeah, we deal with some patients who have very serious illnesses, and as I've mentioned, I work in stem cell transplantation, which in the past means that you only would have, a few months or years to live, but now they are given treatments which are intended to cure, meaning they don't need any other thing after they get the treatment. So it really carries a lot of weight, because any wrong move along the way might also alter the course of the disease and the eventual outcome. So it's really important that all of this information, because they are now readily available, will be provided to the patients. We really encourage them to read up on their own, so that they'll be able to ask the right questions, because sometimes we do not expect or do not know exactly what worries them or what concerns them, because our viewpoint might be different from their own personal circumstance, and we sometimes forget those. So we really encourage them to look up and to read and to ask all the questions before they decide on what is best for them.
So, in our discussions, and because it's your specialty, you often talk about stem cells. So, a lot of us, and myself, we don't know that much about stem cells. So, perhaps can you tell us more, what are stem cells? Where do they come from? How do you deal with them, for example?
All right, that might need another podcast, but in short, it's not something new actually. So this concept has been known for many decades already, even in the 50s. So basically, that's the building blocks of our body. That's where we start from the time we were fertilized until we're growing up in the womb, and until we're adults. But of course, as an adult, we don't have much of those stem cells, unless you get into a condition where you need to repair certain areas of the body. So basically, we have them with us, and they get activated when needed. So I call them our spare tire. So they're there when they are needed. But of course, for some patients, we need more of them in order to make them useful for treatment. And that's what we do for patients, for example, who have leukemia, and they receive stem cell from a healthy donor to replace the ones that's damaged. So that's basically the very standard way of using the stem cells. But lately, more studies and research have been using it for many other conditions that you can think of, from Alzheimer's to Parkinson's to spinal cord injury, autism, heart disease, liver disease, down the line. So there is an explosion of researches being done for these different conditions, on top of what has been used for the past decades for blood conditions.
So, how do you convince patients, especially since stem cell, yes, it started in 1950s, but again, it's based on Western. So, it's quite new, at least in the Philippines. The first time I heard about it, I think it was from a radio station. And they were putting it in the context of beauty.
Mm.
Like, you should use this because it's going to make you look younger or something like that. So, a lot of people, when they first hear about stem cells, at least at that time, they think it is a beauty regimen. It's supposed to make you look younger, or it's a fountain of youth. They don't think of it at whole. Stem cell, you're going through stem cell not because you want to look younger. You're most probably going through it because you're having a deadly disease. That's not what people thought of before. or there's a lot of treatments that its primary purpose is to treat a disease, and just so happens the secondary is what we go for. So what do we call it? Buta drips, right? The drips that makes you look fairer. But I what I saw was it's not that wasn't the primary purpose, right? The primary purpose is to treat the liver, I believe, or something like that. And then that's why people die. So because they go to clinics and they go to practitioners that don't understand that, they just think if I keep injecting, I'll be fairer faster. But it doesn't work that way. So I can imagine as a doctor, I don't know if you met some patients that they have these crazy ideas, because you're right, not only because we look at ChatGPT, most of us, at least my generation, will go through TikTok, and TikTok is gonna say this beauty regimen, or by doing this, it's gonna help clear up my skin, look younger. So I would say social media has a huge impact on the way we talk about stem cells. And if I were to go through TikTok now, people won't say, hey, I'm getting stem cell because I'm having the disease. They often say, I'm going to stem cell because I want to look young without going through plastic surgery. So it's very myself. My question now would be, how do you deal or communicate to that as a doctor? That yes, this treatment, the ones that you look at social media, those are often secondary purpose. But the main purpose of stem cells is not actually beauty regimen, it's actually for deadly diseases. Like, how do you communicate that to a patient, especially someone that's young as myself who's bombarded with all of those stuff?
Yeah, you're right. I've been asked those questions over this past several years since I started work on this. So, and it's not just people who are on social media. I even have to talk to doctors because there's still a lot of misconceptions because some of the things that are seen and read on paper over the internet are not always vetted in terms of its scientific basis. And of course, the difficulty is that people would just accept this as a fact, whereas there's a mixture of fact and fiction in some of this information that's available. So I even have to go through explanations, even for doctors. And what I always tell them is that we go back to the basics, wherein that stem cells were really intended at the start for treatment of diseases, and up to now, that's what I am involved in treatment of diseases like leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, etc. And those are really medical conditions. Now, your question about aesthetics and all this regenerative medicine that's being talked about, there is a science to it. So there's no question about the science. It's just the way it's being presented to the public, such that it is not made clear that all of these are still being studied, and we need solid data that it is indeed effective. And for a lot of conditions aside from what you mentioned. And what I always tell my audience is that if you are going to use stem cells to make yourself beautiful, the question is it a disease not to be beautiful? So what are we dealing with here? And in medicine, we have ways to measure. For example, if you have a heart disease now and you're given a treatment and you have an endpoint or an objective as to the evidence that it works well. Now, how do you do that for beauty in terms of comparing what was before and what was after? There's a lot of objectivity, subjectivity in all those, and there's very difficult. I don't know if there are strict criteria in order to say that someone is more beautiful now than before.
About the beauty, but what I understood is, at least when I first heard about stem cells in TV programs, is they often say this is the secret of the youth. That's what they say. They say this is the fountain of youth. You're gonna be beautiful because you look younger. That's their definition. Their definition is, if I can look 5 or 10 years younger, this is the treatment that I want. And they often tell the public, since stem cells are genetic, or they're a blank canvas. Just like what you said, it's with us from the beginning. And because stem cells, you can treat that so that this treatment of stem cells is made only for you, based on your genes, based on your history. It's only made for you. So during that time when I was younger, I thought that was a personalized skincare routine. It's true, that's how I thought about stem cells. Now you're saying, hey, this is like for disease that's not supposed to. the primary purpose is not to make you look 10 years younger. It's to treat deadly diseases like Parkinson's, leukemia, and the like. So my question now is, a lot of people, especially young people like myself, we like to look at alternatives. We like to know what is the newest thing. It's like a trend. So I'm pretty sure as a doctor, you have dealt with patients that say, Doc, I want this treatment because it's what's popular, not necessarily means that's the right treatment for their condition. So how do you deal with that? Especially since, for example, my generation, we're always at TikTok, Instagram, or perhaps Facebook, if some of them still have Facebook. And I would say we're quite pressured to do what our peers are doing.
Okay, so just to make it clear, all of these conditions are still being studied, including regenerative medicine, and that is really the holy grail in terms of looking for the fountain of youth and preserving our bodily function so that we do not age as fast as normal. And there's a science to it. I agree, but it will take more years to be able to say that, hey, it really works. Because again, the real problem here is objective evidence that such a thing works. I mean, your friend can just tell you that you look younger now, or you look more beautiful now, or you're more agile now. But we need objective evidence, all right, and not just someone telling you so. All right. So that's how it works in medicine. And maybe that time will come, I hope, with all the researches that are ongoing now. And it's really important to emphasize that to people that these are not magic pills. Okay, and we cannot just come up with something today and then it will be marketed to the whole world tomorrow. Because if we say that it's a medical treatment, for example, it needs a solid proof, and those things do not happen overnight. But it's true that some are just eager to avail of this right now rather than later. And I understand that there are those who concerns, but we really emphasize to them and even to some doctors that we really need to have solid data in terms of the science. Now, the other aspect is regulations, and it's different in every part of the world. So there are areas where it is more permissive, and there are places where it's very strict in terms of being able to provide for this. And that is something that's quite a challenge in developing countries for regulations to come as fast as the science grows.
My question now, okay, perhaps this can be our last question, is most of these studies, they might often come to developing countries to test their drugs. And yet our regulations are not that permissive the moment it proves that, hey, for this population, it's actually, we're more optimistic with the results. So how do you deal with that? Because for me, it doesn't make sense that you come to my country, it's developing, you use my population as a test center or lab rat for your, say, vaccines or any other medicine intervention. And yet the government is not that permissive if it says that this is actually a good thing.
It's actually the other way around.
Okay.
In those places where there are no laws or regulations in place yet, that's where all these products and patients go to. And because the doctors are not bound by to follow certain regulations, they are able to freely perform some of these procedures without much worry that they're going to break any law. And that is actually a global problem right now because, for example, patients from countries where there are strict regulations, they're not able to do it, even for serious diseases, just because the law does not require them. So there's the so-called medical tourism, and they go to other countries to have these treatments done, and that creates a lot of problems down the line. And I have been trying to get myself involved in these things as well. But as you know, it's a big challenge talking about the science and merging it with regulations. It's really a very challenging field.
I think it's also challenging knowing that if you were to talk to regulators, they're not trained in medicine. So perhaps you're going to say some jargons and they might misinterpret the words. So for example, you say that, oh, stem cells, it's been with us, that's actually where we started, and somehow it's specialized into functions that this cell is going to be for the eyes, this cell is for my lips. So some people out there can say, oh, this stem cell is a monster. And if we're not careful, it become a Frankenstein in your body. or that's how people might exaggerate it. It's funny when I said it, but I can imagine if you're a regulator and you misinterpret these terms, it might be difficult for medicine to go through. So my question is, how do you communicate with regulators knowing they don't have not only the experience, but they don't understand the jargons that you use?
Of course, they will have to get the opinion from experts, and with enough resources that's readily available. So that should not be a big problem. It's really the intention of providing for the public good that you would have to come up with this so that people are guided, and as well as for the doctors who are into this type of procedures. The other big challenge is that there are even politicians who are promoting
Mhm.
these procedures that they have obtained abroad. You can read that up from the internet, and that's the biggest challenge because the population will tend to also believe the politicians and the celebrities who
Mhm.
are endorsing this type of products and procedures that they have obtained locally or even abroad. So that's a bigger problem.